Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some faux tie-dye cards. I recently got this So Grateful for You press plate, and every single time I look at it, I just see tie-dye. So I needed to get it out of my system. I'm going to use some distress watercolor cardstock because we're going to be using some water with this. So you need to use cardstock that can handle that water. I have 6 different distress pads in rainbow colors here. I've got Carved Pumpkin, Squeezed Lemonade, Twisted Citron, Salty Ocean, Wilted Violet, and Picked Raspberry. Now, these are my favorite colors to kind of do with rainbow colors, but you don't necessarily need 6 different colors. You could easily do less and just do the colors that you like. And you can see that I'm really quickly just putting a little bit of each color onto that distress watercolor. There's a little bit of white showing through. That's okay. There's nothing, it doesn't need to be completely covered, and it doesn't need to look pretty. For the second background, I'm using some Canary markers. These are just a dye-based marker. You could use any dye-based marker for this. For the colors that I'm using, again, I've got a rainbow here. I've got 359 Magenta. I've got 051 Orange Red, 166 Canary, 253 Grass, 207 Cyan, and 688 Violet Blue. But once again, you don't necessarily need all 6 colors. For what I wanted to create, I really love how all 6 colors looked, but you don't necessarily need it. So once you've got all your color down, and once again with that marker one, you can see that I wasn't super careful. You just put it down on your desk, and I like to use some water from my distress sprayer to both suction that watercolor paper down on my desk as well as spray on top of it. And by having water on both the background as well as the top, I find that my paper curls less. It does take a lot longer to dry, but I find that I get a better result because that paper doesn't curl and I don't have ink running down the sides because of the curling. Now I'm going to use that So Grateful for You press plate. I put it in my Better Press, and I take my paper, and this is the one that I used the ink pads on, and I'm taping that to the clear plate. I'm going to use some black ink on my press plate, and then I'm going to put the base with the clear plate and run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6. I'm using the Better Press ink that comes with it. You could use any black ink for this because we're not going to do anything afterwards, so you don't need to worry about anything running or anything. For a background like this, a larger ink pad probably would ink it a lot quicker than the small Better Press one, but I just had it on hand and figured it was nice and easy to grab. Once I have the base and the clear plate together, I can run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 for that pressure and to transfer that ink over. For my second card, rather than doing both of them with exactly the same technique, I am going to use it just in my Spellbinders Platinum 6. I'm using the stacking for embossing a die, and I'm just going to use some black Memento ink here. And the reason I'm using Memento ink is just it was a bigger pad. It's also black, but it was just within reach. Again, it could be any black pad that you have. I put my paper on top of it and then put the clear mat down. And I think my paper shifted because when the ink transferred, it wasn't super clean. So just keep in mind, if you want to do this technique, perhaps tape your paper down before putting that embossing pad down. Because the paper was curved a little bit from that water, it was hard to have it flat and not have it shift, but just keep in mind that that can happen. I still really liked the way it turned out, and I honestly think not many people would notice because it's really minor. For my outline here, rather than taking some black cardstock and matting it, I chose to do my cheat mat, which is just a Copic marker. I use the chisel side and I run it down the edge of the paper. It gives it a nice black outline. It ties in the black from the ink from the Better Press plate. And it just works really quickly and easily and perfectly because there's so much texture on this background, both with the color as well as what was created with the Better Press plate. It was the easiest way to create an easy mat for it. I'm using some Barely Art glue in a Spellbinders Fine Line bottle to apply to the back. And I want to make sure I get a good amount of glue over that whole background. And then I put it to the card base and put an acrylic block on it to hold it down nice and flat while it dries. I have some Concord and Ninth Just Saying dies that I'm going to use for the sentiment on the front of these cards. I love the large sentiment and I love that it has a shadow with it. This is going to be perfect for the card because it's also going to keep that background, keep a lot of it showing. So it's not going to hide a lot of that background. I love using the fine tipped bottle here with these sentiments. It makes it really, really easy to put just the right amount of glue on there and to get it on all the place that it matters basically. So I put it on the back of the die cut, put the die cut down, and then I also use an acrylic block here to hold it down while it dries. It usually only takes maybe a few seconds for that glue to start holding on, but it's just nice to have your hands free to work on other things while that is drying and while that's just starting to grab. Once I have my sentiments all dried, I can glue that to the front of the card. And because it's already on the base, it's really easy to just add some glue and then put it wherever you want on the front of the card. And I love how the inks blended together and created a really cool tie-dyed look with this. The sky's the limit when it comes to color combinations, and this will work with any dye-based ink. So any dye-based ink pad, any dye-based marker, it'll work perfectly for that. Once my sentiment is dry, I chose to take some glossy accents and put it on one of the sentiments just to give it a bit of a different texture. Now the Glossy Accents bottle has a nice fine tip to it, but you do want to be especially careful on the finer areas of the sentiment, not to press too hard to get too much of the glossy accents in place. If by chance you do have a little bit too much and it goes right over the edge of that letter, what you can do is take either a toothpick or a push pin or something with a really, really fine tip. A die pick will work as well, and just remove any of that excess glossy accents. When I do this, sometimes I get that and it's just a tiny, tiny little bit. It's really, really easy to remove, and you definitely want to remove it before you give it any time to dry. If it's had a chance to dry a little bit and get a little bit thick, it's going to be a lot harder to remove. So definitely do that right after you've applied it while it's still very liquid and loose. It's really easy to clean that up, and it makes it look so much better by just having that little bit cleaned up. Once you've got it nice and cleaned up, let that sit to dry, and it really depends on how much you have applied. I typically leave it for at least an hour, and for me, I have to leave the room so I don't accidentally mess it up. Here are the finished cards. They came together super, super quickly. The hardest part of this technique is waiting for that ink to dry for the very first part on the watercolor cardstock. But what I'll typically do is I'll do this in the evening or later in the day, leave it, and so then by the time I come to it in the morning, it's completely dried. Love how bright and vivid these are. These would make great cards for many, many different themes, and that simple sentiment on the front of it is absolutely perfect. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.